So, like, are there moral implications? Like, this may sound like something really minor to people who aren't dealing with the subtext in life. In other words, they haven't been called out and challenged as to their moral decision making in life, and it does come down to decisions that people have to make in the real world where there isn't a mommy, a daddy, an auntie, a even a state that's going to catch you when you fall. You know, the spider's web, basically. This decision to follow your principles and to follow a combination, trying to weigh out the heart and the head, right? Like, am I overthinking this? Then you look for validators, like, and when those validations come back that indeed you are making a moral decision in the under the scope of virtues in pervading society, community, but you are also held to a higher standard above others who have no moral implications whatsoever. They don't consider it, and yet they're using they're sublimating, they're using an esoteric fringe craft, if you will. Even people who, seduce. When a woman seduces a man, she's using a form of craft. There is an energy involved. And with what I'm trying to say is, with some people, they seem to be exempted from a moral consequence. And this gets into the left and right paradigm, where on the right, there's a principle protocol, and that's why I found it so paramount, so pertinent to so why would this happen? Like, why would these punctilio details in principle become so evident and important on one side for these people, for me, on the right side here, and be 100%, not only just abstruse and obfuscated and murky, but then when you start to see that these people are sacrificing you, you're brought out of the woodwork like a fox hunt, literally, and these people are doing the exact anti-principle protocol, serving another master. So they are following the dark path. I'm not going to say triad, or all these things are linked and implicated, and the power structures, if you want to call it power, over the civic arms, like CPS ruined my entire life. Someone could go in, my ex-wife, and make claims that I hadn't spent time with, made a payment toward my children in 5 or 6 years when they stayed with me most of the time. Where anytime this person came and begged, I would watch them while she went out philandering and doing all the things that she did. But because she didn't feel the moral exacting, yet these people take on a false persona of purity. This person plays almost like she's going through this sketch or play, this sort of pathos, to act like, project an image that she's this squeaky clean victim, right? So It does get into personality disorders, borderline personality, histrionics, bipolarism. However, the DSM wants to identify this, but strangely, sadism isn't in there, and that's the main juice of adrenochrome collecting, to get a reaction. And so there's this conjecture and subjectivity about the holographic universe, whether or not people are really gravitating toward this idea and playing with it, where they believe that this 100% is a hologram. And what I determined through a lot of strange esoteric experiences, when I called this pecking order, this power, this this process that seems to attack a select group of people, and on the other side, it uses that power or that energy to rework, subvert, and power this paradigm of an anti-principle opposite. And so you start to have this dichotomy that exists in families, in communities, where you start to scratch your head and you wonder, who are the good guys? And it's like the good guys look for the most marginalized people. Now, there are other strange esoteric truths that underlie things like Nathaniel Gillis's work, where he's looking at this like a center singular intelligence, where it almost becomes undeniable that the information, the process, and the sadistic payoff seems to be synonymous with one sort of central and pervading intelligence, right? And then you get into the areas where, if we could make this assumption and say that we're not going to call them extraterrestrials, we're not going to call them ETs, we're going to assume that all things that are based around this demonology, and we're going to use the term as more of an, not necessarily an abstract, it's obviously specific, but a term that we'll use until we have more information and understand what's going on, if we ever do get there, right? So it became extremely important to me to figure out what's going on, try and establish a systematic order. And I was just talking to my son. He's trying to come up with a logo for his band. And I realized, looking at his name, looking at what he's doing, looking at the process, the energy's already there. The symbols of his name are already there. How he lives his life, the checkerboard between darkness and light, the balance of morality and virtue and principles. I just said that in reverse, but from a principle standpoint, there has to be a nexus or an axiom that's based around purity. And then we start to see that this left-hand path sacrifices purity and the purity in people. You have these divisions that are or aren't associated with the collection of adrenochrome, of harvesting and utilizing children in child trafficking or the marginalized, using and parlaying this program that is based on homeless people, the solution of it, where people are yelling at themselves, talking to themselves. They've been called different things throughout antiquity, being afflicted by leprosy, being afflicted by mental illness, and end up on this pharmaceutical protocol where they are now in this strange place where they're on the streets from town to town across the U.S., maybe around the world, talking to themselves and fighting spiritual battles that nobody seems to really understand or correlate, yet it's rampant, and there are many. So then we go back to Nathaniel Gillis's work. And even more so, we go back to the subsurface level of, is this a holographic universe? Is there an actual projection? I'm not just talking about that main molecular constant with Metatron's cube, the Star of David, these 6 points of energy and a center that has the two dilating in, dilating out, inspiring, expiring air to breathe. Our center point, our soul center, the center of the earth, the center of the solar system, how these things cross correlate. Torsion field energies, meridian lines, you name it. But what I've conjectured and determined through these strange, anomalous experiences that I've had, where I called it out, started to do these rituals in my mind. When I say rituals, I'm talking about the application for days at a time, sometimes not sleeping, of focusing energies in. We're talking men who stare at goats type of stuff. I had never seen that. I was dealing and working with my own experience. I was the experiencer. I had no foundation under, this is going back 10 to 15 years ago. And the last thing on my mind was any of this stuff. And not understanding occult practices, occult rituals, initiate programs, secret societies. Of course, I got into studying and researching that full time at that point. And that's what it does, is it subverts you from being a part of this fine Masonic gentleman's club, where if you don't keep your mouth shut, go along with an alliance, then you're choosing, it's like you're contracting out, you're choosing to go another way, this way, the hard way. You're going against the grain, so to speak. So there's this assumption and pre-assumption that you will go along with this, and therefore on a carbon-based solid level, if we can even call it that, we have a Masonic ritual and rite. Yes, the Masons have been dumbed down. If you look back at Rudolf Steiner's work, if you look at a lot of other people's work, you'll see that the whole Knights Templar, that these Masons, maybe there was a hijacking that occurred at some point where the people that were considered the builders were in fact more of what we would term gods, and that they were given this great responsibility to oversee and make sure that the power structures stayed in congruity, and to where there was an ontological aspect to this trickle down in this energy system. And that's, again, how important this is. Not a complete symbol or sigil, but it's showing the process. Every angle, and even more so I didn't get into here, but every degree and ratio of how, and the length of every line and the colors that are used is an expression and extremely important in a communication, where if you get that correctly, you could send out a signal out into the far deep reaches of space, if that's a thing, if that really occurs. Who knows? Who knows really what's going on, you know? But that information would be able to be decoded and understood on a universal level, where there is no assumption of an entomological nomenclature that would come about in any sort of rational sense. We're talking about anything with two eyes that can see that and differentiate it. The symbol, the sigil, would be able to backward engineer if they had reached a certain state of intelligence gathering information. So we kind of assume, a cause and effect there, where, well, they might think completely different. It's like they still poop, they still breathe something, they still, respirate, aspirate, have to drink some sort of fluids. There's still sickness, these things are synonymous, and we call them human qualities, but they are They're qualities that a single-celled organism goes through also. So it's life, you know. So getting back to the main course would be that I believe that there's a projection over a corporeal carbon-based aspect to the world that seems hard, it seems solidified, it's being held together cymatically, meaning that there is an existential influence, but then there is an internal energy that is displayed in our DNA, but also the molecular structure of a thing, right? The atomical structure of a thing, the power or energy structure that compartmentalizes and says, this is a unit. And so, in my opinion, there is something that very much starts to look like an on-running program that seems like, you know, some people have conjecturized this and called this satanic computer. Almost like not necessarily trying to get into the religiosity of it, but saying, we don't have anything better to call it right now. So that's what it's called. That's the name. Like, we'll call it that for right now. Just like demons. Let's call it that right now because we have no better titleship, but we have to call it something, X, Y, Z, you know, whatever symbol we're going to. But then there are these universal symbols that begin to come up that we're being manipulated by, that are based on, again, nomenclature, the naming of things. You know, you have the 24 Greek letters in the alphabet, and those being sigils and central characters. You know, again, you know, there are symbols and characters, chi. You know, omega, the omicron, phi. There are universal symbols. And so why are there universal symbols? Why is this important? There's communication through long stretches of time where time isn't moving in an assumptive way on a 24-hour clock that's supposedly based much on our precessionary units of time, 24 hours, you know, which is basically a summation. But that there is this holographic recreation, and even I would say a dictation as to a recharacterization of who I am, a projection onto who I am, where I am, who I am as the straw man through a certain light projection that is both identified in me as a number system, in my chromosomes, born and birthed into this culture, and that there is this dictatorial aspect with cause and effect where there's not a God judging you. There aren't necessarily, I'm not saying yes or no, demonic energies or a Satan, but there's more a protocol through a system that seems to be somewhat malleable based on we the people and what we determine as lawful, that both it acts as the judge and the jury in a millisecond when certain people are signing or sinning, going against their right hand path or their left hand path paradigm. And so you have these people who are very bad people. They're doing terrible things. They're following a left-hand path narrative that is based on these anti-principles. But when they do things like there's that adage that what is it? When you give, shame on you for giving. It's no good deed goes unpunished. So as soon as these people with the left hand path paradigm do a good deed, they are then subjected toward a right hand path consequence, where they, through their own information gathering, through their own interaction, through the inclination of who they are, they continue on this left-hand path, because it comes down to very simple things: is to survive or not to survive, and then the consequences from that. On the right-hand path, on the right-hand paradigm, it's an understanding that my soul is eternal. My soul wills to survive, but can it survive when it has made these detrimental choices where a sacrifice has been made and someone has been sacrificed? So that's what a lot of the videos that I'm putting out down below go over: this moral dilemma, this dilemma in virtue, a value system. It gets into sociology. It gets into finances and economy, with the entropy and the thermodynamics, with our own energy, where the energy goes. And it's basically people following true to a system that they pay homage to, that has no gray areas. It is completely black and white, like these checkerboards. It is tied in with the Rosicrucians. It is tied in with the Masonic order. It is tied into good and evil, God and Satan. It's always playing with this balance that you'll see again in the letters and the numbers that we use in a system. You see, here's Z, right? Here's Z. And here's what Z is from a multi-dimensional perspective. When I make a Z front and back, it comes up with a lever system, right? It just naturally creates this, but how natural is that Z, that zigzag, that zigzag? The M portrays an energy system. The L creates an I bracket. And then if you're to look at that more as a universal symbol, like that L for lambda, right? The Greek 24-letter origin, you start to see how these things have a universal language that is projected back out in this archaic program, if you will, that almost has to be looked at almost like this arbitrary ductilio, black and white. Which side do you serve? How well are you serving those principles? So we'll get into more talks like this, but we can't get away from the injustice and the lack of information that's shared, and how you have to find this information relatively on your own, as if you're just this little candle floating in the wind.